I would like to continue to show you the games from this book that is a biography, but in the end Grandmaster Soltis put something like 15 games. Now, before I go on, I would like to tell you one thing. Game number 2 is this Serafino Dubois against Steinitz, which is the same game number 2 that we find in this book. But this book is from 2015, while this book is from 1993, and I don't know when Grandmaster Soltis made these games, but the cover is from 2006. So in any case, it's at least 8-10 years before this book. Now, why I'm telling you this? Because the second game of Serafino Dubois, Soltis even described who is the guy who found the move that would have saved White. So practically in this game White would have had a chance to save himself, but he didn't find the right move. So what happened is that many people analyzed the game, right? But nobody found the right move up to 1989, when Larsen found it. The problem is that in this book is not mentioned that Larsen found it. And that for me is kind of important, because we should give credit to who makes the correct analysis, because it seems a lot of other grandmasters from the past didn't find it. In any case, I want to present you game number 3, Wilhelm Steinitz against G.A. MacDonald, played in Dundee 1867. Here it says, most of Steinitz's early as well as many later games appear quaint and dated to a modern player because of the Victorian era openings using them. I've chosen the following game because it features an opening that could have been played today, and because it illustrates Steinitz's profound insight into exploiting enemy weaknesses. So this is also the reason why I like to present you games from this book, because Soltis is really good in selecting games, in explaining them. I really love his prose. So Steinitz plays e4 and MacDonald starts with c5, the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, a6. And now Steinitz plays an interesting move. He plays g3. Here Soltis says, most of his contemporaries, I suspect, would have developed a piece routinely here with bishop e2 or bishop e3, but Steinitz prepares to approach the middle game in a modern way, by fianchettoing the king bishop, so as to prevent d5, this d5, right? Because if the king bishop is here, practically he has 1, 2, 3 pieces, and then of course there is the queen behind. It can be a kind of problematic, right? And then it also exerts indirect pressure on c6 and b7, no? When you put the bishop here. A remarkable decision, considering this was played at the same time he was meeting e4, e5 with the king's gambit. So, what did Black play? Black played bishop c5. The open positions of the Sicilian defense took many years of experimentation for Black to understand the need for preparatory moves such as queen c7 or knight g e7. White sees the flaw of that move and plays knight takes c6, b takes c6, and can you see what would you play as white if you were in this position? What would you play as white? Steinitz played e5, thematically pointing out at the dark square problem that now exists at d6. If black later repairs that all with d6, e takes d6, he would be left with two isolated pawns. And then of course there are continuous problems on those squares that are not covered by the black pawns, like b6, c5, d6. So there is a complex of weak dark squares. Okay, let's move on. What did black play? He played queen b6, queen d2 defend f2, knight e7, and knight e4. Notice that in fact the first thing I ask myself is why he didn't play this. It makes more sense. And Soltis says white is also comfortably better after 10 knight a4 and 11 knight takes c5, and the dark squares are all still weak. Okay, because why we call them weak? Because white has the dark square bishop, so he can control them. Black will not have it, so he cannot control them. That's the real problem. Okay. But in this case, again, you know, they tell you that the bishop is free, the knight is free. Well, it depends in which moment of the game, because sometimes in the middle game a knight can be more important, more worthy than a bishop. For example, this bishop here, yeah, you say it's free, but it's just a pawn. It cannot move, right? So this is not really a good bishop. Like this bishop is not good at the moment either, while this is good because look how many squares he has that he can control. So that also makes the difference. Okay. Okay, so black continued with castle, and white played bishop d3. Boom. This is a very impressive move because obviously since he moved this, one would expect it here, right? But here there is not the defender of h7, so Steinitz is already pointing at the kingside attack. As you can see, sometimes it's better to be kind of flexible instead of saying, but I have played this, I must put the bishop here. No, because there is nothing here, there is not a knight here that is protecting this. So this can become a real big attack, right? And that's why Steinitz played knight e4 instead of knight a4. So all of this must be noticed when we see a game from one of these champions that obviously weren't playing blitz. They were thinking deep because they fought 5 or more minutes for each move. Obviously black is not stupid either, and he starts to play knight g6 because he tries to block that diagonal. But obviously there is an attack, right? f4. And now black tries to get rid of the problem on d6, and also he needs at a certain point to give some space to this bishop. So what does it say here? This gives white exactly what he wants. A liquidation of the dark square complex that will leave black with all sorts of points for invasion. A vast improvement would have been f6 instead of d6, which makes sense because then he can really play d6 and control some dark squares. But he played this. He takes d6, f5, sorry, mistake, f5, another dark square, e5, okay, is surrendered by this move. But there was no other way to regain the pawn there, right? Yeah. Okay, knight takes c5, queen takes c5, queen c3, and queen takes d6. Obviously, to exchange the queens probably wasn't a good idea because the endgame that follows it's definitely bad for black. And you can see a backfoot pawn, two isolated pawns, white has the bishop pair, definitely not a good idea to exchange the queens, right? b3, a5, e3, queen d5, rook f1, and rook a7, protecting this because after b3 obviously white wants to play for a checkmate on g7. So let's see what happens. Bishop b2, c5, and castle. Wow. Typical of a player, Steinitz would become in the 1870s, castling at move 20. Yeah, we are at move 20, incredible. He can now choose a middle game plan among several candidates. A. Attack on the king side, where g7 is vulnerable. Invasion along the d file, coupled perhaps with pressure against e6. Or queenside aggression, aim at c5 and other weaknesses, obviously. Queen c6. And here you should pause the video and think what you would play if you were white, okay? Because this is kind of an important moment. And this is also why I like to watch Soltis games, the games that he comments or selects, because he obviously finds always a critical moment, okay? White played h4. The advance of a h-pawn will drive away a key defender of a king side and enable white to occupy e5. So that's the goal of h4, to go here, remove this, occupy e5. Rook f7, h5, knight e7. So obviously, as you can see, he immediately fought to control this, since there is this pair that is aiming at here. Bishop c4, attacking this. Knight d5 and queen e5. A textbook example of centralization. Among white threats now is rook takes d5. And notice how few tactical variation white has had to examine. Instead of 10 moves line, white hasn't been required to calculate more than 2 moves ahead so far, and it's already the 24th move. So obviously the sacrifice on this is because if you take back, it takes with the bishop, attacking the queen c6 and the rook f7. Now the problem of the rook f7 is that, let me show you one thing, okay? because this is kind of crazy. Now the rook f7 is pinned, okay, so you say, oh, let's move this here, checkmate. And so you must be very careful with pins, because pins can really make you give you any false impression of safety when there is none, okay. So what did black play in this position? He played queen c7. Obviously he was probably trying to exchange the queens, but that's not a good idea. So let's see what happens. Rook takes d5, e takes d5. What do you think white played? Obviously he didn't play this, right? He played queen e8 check, rook f8 blocking the check, bishop takes d5 check again. And at this point, I don't know, I think black could resign, but he didn't. So he played queen f7, bishop takes f7, rook takes f7 because this is pin, okay, and obviously he goes back, queen e5, rook f6, and h6 ends the game. Finally black decided to resign after this move. I hope you enjoyed this game. That was game number 3 of this biography. The biography is really well curated, and I think it was thanks to this biography that they found the tomb of Steinitz in New York, because it was forgotten practically. So it was really a landmark moment for chess. Thank you very much.